Luyando Musonda kept her eyes on the table, focusing on a chip in the old formica surface as a tear rolled down her face. She tugged at her tan dress, the one she'd been so excited to wear, and suddenly felt ridiculous sitting there under those harsh fluorescent lights. Michael leaned back in his seat, hoodie hanging loose on his shoulders, waving their receipt around like he was trying to prove some kind of point. And he wasn't exactly keeping his voice down either. "You got the steak? Seriously?" He let out this sharp laugh that made her stomach turn. "What? You think money just grows on trees or something?" Between them sat a single rose, still in its plastic wrapper, looking as out of place as she felt. Lyando's voice came out barely above a whisper. "It's Valentine's Day. You told me we were going somewhere special." Michael just rolled his eyes and went back to scrolling on his phone. "Look at you all dressed up like that. This is a diner, Luyando. You look ridiculous." He smacked his palm on the table hard enough that the silverware jumped, and just like that, everyone was staring. She quickly wiped her eyes, wanting nothing more than to disappear, while Michael went on about how she should just be happy he even bothered to show up. But before we get to who steps in to help her out of this mess, if you think every woman deserves better than this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Michael wasn't done. He settled back against the cracked red vinyl, arms folded across his stained gray hoodie, and just looked at her, like she disgusted him. "You know what your problem is, Luyando?" His tone was ice cold. "You walk around like you're something special." He jerked his chin toward the glass of water she hadn't touched. "What? Tap water's beneath you now. Need it fizzy? Flown in from the Alps or something?" Luyando watched a bead of condensation slide down the glass. Her hands were shaking in her lap. "I just asked if they had bottled water. That's all. High maintenance." He cut her off like she hadn't even spoken. "That's your whole deal. Always asking for more than you deserve. You think guys want to deal with someone who's picky about water?" He laughed, short, sharp, mean. The kind of laugh that makes you feel 2 inches tall. She tried to change the subject, tried to pull the night back from the edge. "I didn't mean to. Look, I actually wanted to tell you something. I've been working on my design portfolio, and I have a meeting next week. Someone saw my work online and reached out." Michael was already on his phone. The glow lit up his face as he scrolled, barely listening. "Design?" He said it like the word tasted bad. Then he glanced up with this ugly little smile. "You mean those doodles you post? Come on, Luyando. You're 27. If you were actually talented, something would have happened by now. Stop fooling yourself and get a real job." That one landed. Not the yelling, the coldness. The way he wasn't just mocking what she liked, but who she was trying to become. The tears came before she could stop them, hot and embarrassing. Michael saw and groaned like she'd inconvenienced him. "Oh, great. Crying now. Really? That's pathetic." He leaned across the table, voice louder now, making sure the couple next to them could hear every word. "You need a reality check. Look at yourself. You're lucky I'm even here. No one else is going to deal with all your issues. You should be grateful I took you out at all, not sitting here crying because I didn't order you steak." He sat back, scanning the room like he'd won something. Like watching her shrink made him bigger. A few feet over, everything felt different. In the corner booth, cut off by a panel of cloudy glass, sat a man who looked completely out of place. Seol Kang-ho was alone, perfectly still while the diner buzzed and clanged around him. 42 years old, and every one of them seemed deliberate. Sharp jaw, hair slicked back just so. The kind of expensive clothes that made Michael's entire existence feel small. A black tuxedo, custom-made, with a white shirt so crisp it hurt to look at. The fabric seemed to swallow the fluorescent light instead of bouncing it back. He didn't slouch, didn't tap his foot or check his phone. He just sat there, spine straight, unnervingly composed. In front of him was a single document, heavy paper the color of cream. No scrolling, no distraction. Just his eyes moving across some merger agreement with surgical precision. He picked up a porcelain teacup, sipped, set it back down without a sound. The quiet around him wasn't just absence of noise, it was presence. The kind that made you hold your breath without meaning to. Then he stopped reading. His eyes, dark and unreadable, shifted toward the next table. He watched the guy in the gray hoodie gesturing wildly. Watched the woman in the tan dress make herself smaller. Saw the tears, saw the venom, didn't blink. His face gave away nothing, but something simmered underneath. Michael kept going, his voice getting louder as he mocked Lyando's crying, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just caught the wrong person's attention. Seol glanced down at the gold watch on his wrist, tapped the face once with his fingertip. Tick, like he was counting down something. He wasn't rushing, but whatever patience he had, it was running out. The air around him felt heavier. A waitress walked by and instinctively gave him space, like she could sense something dangerous without knowing why. He was a wolf in a room full of rabbits. And right now, he was watching the loudest, most careless one. Michael laughed again, ugly, grating, and Seol's fingers tightened just slightly against the table's edge. The king was watching, and the fool had no idea he was already done for. Luyando made herself as small as possible, studying the table's surface like she could disappear into the fake wood grain. She kept her eyes down. Looking at him would only make her cry more, and nothing fed him quite like her tears. Instead, she turned slightly toward the window, toward the flickering neon sign she could barely see through her blurred vision. Her heart wouldn't stop pounding. All she wanted was to leave, to get out of this dress, scrub her face clean, and forget she'd ever expected anything close to romance from someone who saw kindness as weakness. But Michael wasn't done. Her silence was making him angrier. He needed her attention, needed her to know he was in control. Hey, the word came out sharp enough to startle a baby at the next table into crying. I'm talking to you. Don't look away from me. She didn't turn back quickly enough. Before she understood what was happening, his hand shot across the table and locked around her wrist. His fingers dug in hard, pressing into skin and bone until she gasped. It wasn't just a touch, it felt like being trapped. His palm was hot and damp, suffocating. Michael, stop, she managed, her voice barely there. She tried to pull away but couldn't. He held on tighter, then yanked her arm forward hard enough that she lurched in her seat. I said, look at me. His elbow knocked into the tall glass of water near the table's edge. Everything slowed down. She watched the glass tip and fall. The crash seemed impossibly loud. Ice scattered everywhere, and freezing water poured across the table and onto her lap. The tan fabric darkened immediately, soaking through to her skin. Water dripped steadily onto the floor beneath her, each drop like a tiny drumbeat. Michael didn't even blink. No apology, no move to help. He just stared at the spilled water with a look of contempt, like it had personally insulted him. Then he stood. The booth groaned under his weight as he rose, tall enough to block the overhead light. His shadow fell over her completely. The whole diner went quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet, the kind where something's wrong and everyone knows it. Silverware stopped clinking. A waitress holding a coffee pot stood frozen mid-step. Everyone was looking now, watching the man in the gray hoodie berate the woman shrinking into her seat. And Michael loved it. He leaned over the table until his face was right in front of hers, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. You're so ungrateful, he said, each word like a slap. I take you out on a holiday. I spend my money on you. And you sit there looking miserable? Acting like I'm hurting you. He slammed his hand down on the wet table, sending up another spray of water. You're pathetic, Luyando. Look at yourself. You're a complete mess, and I'm the only one who'd put up with it. In the thick silence Michael had left hanging, a new sound broke through. Not loud, just the deliberate scrape of a chair against linoleum, coming from the VIP corner. Sharp enough that the closest diners looked up from their plates, their attention pulling away from the disaster at table 4. Seol Kang-ho stood. He didn't jump up or make a scene. He just rose, smooth and unhurried, like someone ending a meeting he'd already grown bored of. He waited a beat, letting the room notice him. Then his hands went to his jacket. He buttoned it, one button, the fabric settling across his chest even though it hadn't needed adjusting. He tugged his cuffs. The gold watch on his wrist caught the overhead lights for a second, a quick gleam in the fluorescent glare. Then he started walking. His dress, shoes hit the sticky tile with a steady rhythm. Click, click, click. He wasn't in a hurry. Men like him didn't need to be. People just moved, leaned back in their booths without thinking about it, like something in them recognized danger even if they couldn't name it. The temperature around him seemed to drop. He was quieter than Michael had been, and somehow that made him worse. Luyando saw the movement out of the corner of her eye. Polished shoes, black and gleaming, stopping right next to her table. Her breath caught. She thought it was management coming to throw them out. Or maybe the cops. She didn't know which would be worse. Seol stood there, perfectly still. He didn't look at Michael. Didn't even glance his way. To him, Michael might as well have been part of the furniture. Annoying background noise, nothing more. His eyes were on Luyando, on the water soaking through her dress, on the sad little rose lying on the table, on the tears cutting lines through her makeup. His face gave nothing away, but he was watching, really watching. He reached into his jacket, the motion so smooth it almost didn't register. When his hand came back out, he was holding a handkerchief, white silk, folded into a perfect square. He held it out to her. The gesture was gentle, almost careful. His hand looked expensive against the grimy, water-stained table. Michael blinked. He'd been expecting fear, maybe. An audience, definitely. What he hadn't expected was to be completely ignored. It hit him like a slap. The silence from this stranger was somehow louder than anything he could have said. Michael's face went red, his ego visibly cracking. "Excuse me." His voice came out sharp, a little shaky. He was trying to sound in control. "Who do you think you are? We're in the middle of something here. Get lost, pal." Michael's face contorted with fury. Being brushed off like that, especially with everyone watching, hit him where it hurt most. His whole tough guy act was crumbling. "What? Are you deaf or something?" he yelled, sliding out of the booth. "I told you to get lost." He rushed forward with both hands up, ready to shove this guy right in the chest and send him stumbling backward into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. But it was sloppy, the kind of wild, stupid move you make when you're running on pure anger instead of thinking straight. For someone like Seol Kang-ho, it might as well have been happening in slow motion. Seol didn't budge, didn't even flinch. He was still holding that white handkerchief in his left hand like nothing was happening. Then, just as Michael's hands were about to hit his jacket, Seol's right hand shot out, so fast you could barely see it. There was a dull smack as he caught Michael's wrist midair, fingers locking around it like iron. Michael's own weight worked against him, wrenching his shoulder, but Seol didn't move an inch. The color drained from Michael's face. His shout caught in his throat. He yanked back, trying to break free, but it was useless. Seol's grip was unshakable, the kind of grip that came from years of building something real and tearing down anyone who got in the way. Then, without saying a word, Seol started twisting. No punch, no yelling, just a slow, controlled rotation that sent pain shooting through Michael's arm. He gasped, his legs giving out beneath him. He scrambled to stay upright, but the agony was overwhelming. Bit by bit, he sank down until his knees cracked against the grimy tile floor. There he was, kneeling in front of the man he'd just tried to shove, his cocky attitude completely shattered. That's when Seol finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Deep and steady, carrying a weight that made you listen whether you wanted to or not. "You're loud," he said flatly, like he was commenting on the weather. He looked down at Michael with complete indifference. "And careless. You're disrupting my establishment." Michael looked up, eyes wet with pain. "Why your establishment?" he choked out. Seol didn't bother answering. He just raised his other hand and snapped his fingers. Once. Sharp and clean. The kitchen doors flew open immediately. The restaurant manager came rushing out, a stocky guy who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Sweat was beading on his forehead as he practically sprinted across the floor, stopping a few feet away and bowing so low it looked painful. "Mr. Seol," he stammered, barely able to catch his breath. His head stayed down. "I'm so sorry, sir. I had no idea you were down here. We would have cleared everything out." "The noise," Seol said, releasing Michael's wrist with a dismissive push that sent him sprawling backward onto the floor. "It's ruining the tea." The words hung in the air. You could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't just some random guy. This was the guy, the owner, the one who made the decisions. Michael sat there clutching his wrist, looking between the bowing manager and the man in the tuxedo, and the reality hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just mouthed off to a stranger. He'd picked a fight with the person who owned the place. Seol let go of Michael's wrist like he was dropping something disgusting, practically flinging it away. The whole thing had taken maybe 3 seconds, but you'd think he'd just touched raw sewage. He straightened up, fussing with his cuffs in these quick, irritated movements, his face scrunched up like he'd smelled something rotten. He reached into his pocket. Not for that silk handkerchief he'd given Luyando, but for a little packet of hand wipes. Ripped it open and started scrubbing his fingers down, really going at the spots where he'd touched that ratty gray hoodie. "Get him out of here," Seol said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it had this finality to it that made your stomach drop. He didn't even glance at Michael, who was half sprawled on the floor clutching his wrist. Seol just kept cleaning his hands. "And I don't want to see him in any of my places again. Not here, not the hotel, not the club. He's done." The manager went white. "Yes, Mr. Seol. Right away, Mr. Seol." He snapped his fingers toward the entrance. Two guys materialized from the shadows near the door, security, built like brick walls in dark suits. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Just walked over in these long, heavy strides, reaching the booth before Michael could even think about getting up. "Don't you touch me." Michael's voice shot up an octave, almost breaking. He tried scrambling to his feet, but slipped in the water he'd knocked over earlier. "You can't do this. I'm a customer. I have rights." The first guard didn't bother with words. Just grabbed the back of Michael's hoodie with one hand, his belt with the other, and lifted him straight off the ground like he weighed nothing. Michael's feet flailed in the air, his sneakers squeaking pathetically. "Put me down." He was full-on screaming now, twisting around like a fish on a hook. "I'll call my lawyer. You know who I am. I'll shut this shithole down. I'll bury you." Empty threats bouncing off the walls. He looked ridiculous. That oversized hoodie bunched up around his neck made him look like a kid being hauled to timeout. His face was tomato red, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Seol didn't turn around. Didn't give him the satisfaction. Just stood there with his back to the whole scene, perfectly still against the diner lights. As far as he was concerned, it was already over. This was just taking out the trash. You don't stand there and supervise that. The guards hauled Michael toward the glass doors, his heels dragging and leaving skid marks on the floor. "Luyando," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he tried to catch her eye. "Tell them to stop. You're all insane." Luyando said nothing, just sat there gripping her purse, watching the man who'd spent the last half hour making her feel like dirt getting dragged out like a bag of garbage. The guards shoved the doors open and threw Michael onto the sidewalk. He went down hard on his hands and knees on the cold concrete. The heavy doors swung shut behind him with a solid click, cutting his yelling down to a muffled whine you could barely hear. For a second, nobody moved. The whole diner just sat there in this stunned quiet. Then someone started clapping. An older couple by the window. Then some teenagers a few tables over joined in. Within seconds, the whole place erupted, clapping, cheering, a few whistles. It wasn't just noise. It felt like everyone had been holding their breath and finally let it out. Like something had been set right. The air felt different, lighter somehow, like after a thunderstorm clears out. The clapping died down to whispers, but Luyando kept her eyes glued to the table. She could feel everyone staring. Her neck prickled with it. Sitting there in her tan dress at a booth reeking of old grease and dirty mop water, she felt like she'd been stripped naked in front of strangers. The fight with Michael had been humiliating enough, but having security drag him out? That was worse somehow. Now she was that girl, the one whose boyfriend got kicked out, the one everyone felt sorry for. Her hand shook as she grabbed for her purse. She had to get out of here before the pitying looks crushed her. "Don't leave." Not a question, a command, but said quietly. The same voice that had just sent Michael packing. Luyando looked up, blinking through tears. Seol Kang-ho was standing right next to her booth. God, he was tall. Even the fluorescent lights seemed kinder to him, like they knew better than to wash him out the way they did everyone else. He wasn't watching the door. He was watching her, studying her face so closely it made her chest tight. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said, dipping his head slightly. "Weird to see someone bow like that in a place with sticky floors and laminated menus. It's my responsibility to make sure people are comfortable here." What he did was unacceptable. A laugh bubbled out of her, wet and bitter. She swiped at her face. "You don't need to apologize." He was right. "I do look ridiculous, crying in a diner on Valentine's Day." She waved at the water spreading across the table, seeping into her dress and turning it dark at the edges. "I'm a disaster." His eyes flicked to the puddle, then to the sad plastic-wrapped rose floating in it. Something hardened in his expression, anger, but not at her. at the whole pathetic scene. "You're not a disaster," he said, and his voice dropped lower, almost private even though half the restaurant was still watching. "You're just stuck in a bad situation. That's not the same thing." He moved closer, not in a creepy way, more like he was blocking her from the rest of the room, giving her cover. "A woman like you," he said carefully, like he was picking each word on purpose, "shouldn't waste a single tear on some kid who shows up with pocket change when you deserve the whole vault. He couldn't afford you. Not your time, not your heart, not anything. You don't cry over losing a penny when you're worth a fortune." Luyando just stared. He said it so plainly, like he was commenting on the weather. He wasn't trying to charm her. He genuinely believed it. He nodded toward the VIP section where his untouched table sat under warmer lights. "I can't let you stay here. This booth's soaked. It's cold. And you're alone." He held out his hand. "Come sit with me. The table's dry, the tea's hot, and I promise the company's better." She hesitated, looking at his outstretched palm, then back at the mess around her. "I don't want to impose. And honestly, I'm really not in the mood for a date." "It's not a date," he said evenly, holding her gaze. "Think of it as damage control. It's Valentine's Day. Nobody should be sitting in a puddle on Valentine's Day. Let me salvage what's left of your night." Something in his certainty made her decide. She took his hand. It was warm, solid. He helped her up, and as she left the wet booth and that sad, drooping rose behind, she felt the energy in the room change. People weren't looking at her with pity anymore. Now they were looking at her with something else entirely. She wasn't the girl who got dumped. She was the girl the king picked. The move from the diner to the penthouse felt less like crossing town and more like stepping into another dimension. No more flickering lights or the permanent stink of old fry oil. Now there were chandeliers casting everything in warm honey tones, and the air smelled faintly of something woody and rich, sandalwood, maybe, mixed with aged leather. The clatter and chaos of the diner had disappeared completely, absorbed by thick velvet drapes that probably cost more than her rent. The quiet here wasn't uncomfortable. It felt full somehow, like it was holding its breath. Luyando stood in front of this massive, gilded mirror and barely knew the person looking back. That tan dress, the one still damp with spilled water and shame, was gone. She was wearing black now. Real silk, the kind that moved like water and felt cool against her skin, fitting her body like someone had sewn it specifically for her in the last 60 minutes. It wasn't flashy, just clean lines and devastating elegance. She ran her fingers over the fabric and they shook a little. Not because she was scared, because this was a lot. Behind her, the table was set. 2 places. But what really grabbed your attention were the roses. This enormous arrangement of deep red blooms, maybe 100 of them, sitting there like they owned the room. They were lush and fully open, practically glowing under the light. Nothing like that sad single stem Michael had slapped onto the table at the diner. These weren't an afterthought. These meant something. Seol appeared behind her in the mirror. He'd taken off his jacket, down to just the crisp white shirt and black suspenders stretched across his shoulders. He looked different now, less corporate, more like something coiled and waiting. Dangerous in a calm way. He was holding a necklace, and the thing caught light like it was made of tiny suns. Diamonds, strung together in this delicate chain that still somehow looked substantial. Her breath caught when he stepped closer. She watched him in the glass, pulse hammering. He didn't ask, just moved in with this quiet certainty, like it was already decided. He brought the necklace up and around her throat, and his hands were so careful it almost startled her. She braced herself for roughness. Her body still remembered being grabbed and yanked around by the man who'd left her, but Seol's touch was something else entirely. Like he understood exactly what he was handling. "Lift your hair," he said, voice low near her ear. She swept her curls over one shoulder without thinking, baring the back of her neck. The diamonds settled against her skin, cold at first, and she shivered. He fastened the clasp, a quiet click, and his fingers stayed there a beat longer than necessary. Warm, rough, a kind of claim that made her knees go soft. He stepped back, hands resting lightly on her shoulders, studying their reflection with this look of quiet satisfaction. The diamonds caught the light against the black silk, but they didn't overwhelm her. They just highlighted what was already there. "Better," Seol said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Before, You were wearing a costume. This is more like a uniform. Luyando stared at herself. The tear tracks were gone. That hunched, broken woman from the booth had vanished. The person in the mirror stood tall, looked put together, looked like she could ruin someone's day if she wanted to. The energy between them in that reflection was obvious. Something electric connecting the man in white to the woman in black, but it stayed contained. Respectful. He wasn't leering. He was looking at her the way you'd look at a painting you'd just finished restoring. Dinner showed up on those silent wheeled carts. All white porcelain and gleaming silver, smelling like truffle oil and roasted duck. Seol Kang-ho barely looked at it. Sure, getting out of that chaotic diner and into the quiet of the penthouse had helped, but his mind was still racing. He picked up his fork, then put it right back down. The silence between them wasn't awkward, exactly, but it felt heavy. Like there were things neither of them was saying. He let out this deep sigh, the kind that's supposed to release tension, but somehow just relocates it straight to your forehead. He rubbed the spot between his eyebrows, his eyes drifting back to that thick, cream-colored document sitting next to his wine glass. The same merger agreement he'd been stuck on at the diner. The paper that would decide the future of 3 shipping lanes and millions of dollars. Just looking at it gave him a headache. Luyando watched him over her wine glass. The diamonds around her neck felt cold and heavy. A constant reminder that she owed this man, this stranger, everything. She could see how tired he was, the way his crime boss persona was slipping just enough to show the exhausted guy underneath, the one carrying an empire on his back. "You're not eating," she said quietly, setting her glass down. Seol looked up like he'd forgotten where he was. "Sorry. Sometimes I can't afford to have an appetite." He gestured vaguely at the document. "Business doesn't take holidays. Not even this one." Luyando leaned forward, her black dress whispering against the silk chair. "Is that what you were reading downstairs?" "Before everything." "It's a merger," Seol said, his voice flat. "Complicated. Boring. And unfortunately, time-sensitive. My legal team is useless, and the translation is a nightmare." He started to push the papers away, trying to refocus on her, to be the gentleman he was raised to be. "Can I look?" Luyando asked, reaching out her hand. Seol hesitated, his hand hovering over the document. He looked at her with a hint of amusement. "It's in Korean, Luyando, and the legal jargon is ancient. It would just look like gibberish to you." "Try me," she said, that little confident smile appearing, the first real smile he'd seen from her all night. Something about her boldness intrigued him, so he slid the heavy document across the table. Luyando picked it up, and she didn't just skim it, she read it. Her eyes moved right to left, top to bottom, tracking the vertical text with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She flipped a page, then another. Her forehead creased. "This clause right here," she said, tapping a paragraph on page 3 with one polished fingernail. She looked up at him, and when she spoke again, it wasn't in English. It was perfect, fluent Korean. "The indemnification for the Busan port access is completely one-sided. If there's a union strike, you're on the hook for delay penalties, not the seller." Seol froze. The wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He just stared at her. Hearing his own language come out of her mouth, flawless pronunciation, precise legal terminology, was more shocking than a slap across the face. "You speak." He started in English, then stopped. Luyando didn't even look up to see his reaction. She was too busy reading. "And here," she continued, switching back to English but keeping that Korean rhythm. "They buried a liquidity sweep in the subsidiary notes. Subsection D. If your revenue drops even 5% next quarter, they can immediately seize your collateral. That's a trap, Seol. They're counting on market fluctuations so they can take the ships and the money." She reached across the table, not for her wine, but for his gold fountain pen. Without hesitation, she uncapped it and drew a sharp black line through the clause on page 4. She wrote a correction in the margin, her Korean handwriting blocky and precise. "Strike this," she said, circling what she'd written. "Change the liability to shared risk. And remove the liquidity trigger completely. It's predatory." She capped the pen with a satisfying click and slid the document back to him. Seol looked down at the pages. The original red ink was now marked up with her black corrections. She'd just saved him $12 million in about 30 seconds. He looked back up at her, and everything about his expression had changed. The pity was gone. That protective impulse, gone. What replaced it was something sharper, hotter, more dangerous. He wasn't looking at some charity case anymore. He was looking at an equal. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, the question hanging there between them. Luyando smoothed her napkin, her eyes glinting. "I told you, Seol. I'm a designer. I notice the details other people miss." Seol leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He realized then that he hadn't just rescued some girl from a bad date. He'd found the queen his empire had been missing. Everything had just changed. Seol clicked the pen shut, one sharp sound that cut through the quiet of his penthouse. He didn't glance back at the papers. The millions he'd just locked in? They could wait. Right now, he was focused on the woman sitting across from him. He studied Luyando. Not the crying girl from the diner. Not the woman in the wrinkled tan dress. Just her. The sharpness in her eyes. "I've got a whole team of analysts," he said, turning his wine glass slowly. "Guys with fancy degrees and suits that cost more than most people's rent." But not one of them spotted that problem in subsection D. He took a drink, still watching her. "You caught it in half a minute. In your second language." Lyando's face warmed, but this time it wasn't embarrassment. It was something else. Being recognized. Actually seen. For years, people told her she was too much, too picky, too demanding, too focused on things that didn't matter. Michael said she was high maintenance for having standards. Seol called her brilliant for the exact same thing. "I just pay attention," she said quietly. "Always have." "That's not just paying attention," Seol said. "That's a skill most people don't have." He set down his glass and leaned in. The intensity in his expression had shifted. He wasn't sizing her up anymore. He was making her an offer. "I run a lot of businesses, Luyando. I need people who can spot problems before they blow up. I don't need another yes person at the table. I need someone who sees what I miss." He reached across and put his hand over hers. "Warm. Steady. I've got a position open. Not a date. Not an assistant role. A real job. A consultant who works with me, not for me. Someone who gets that value isn't just about money. It's about knowing what things are actually worth." Luyando looked down at their hands. Somewhere far below, on some cold sidewalk, Michael was probably still yelling at a locked door in that ratty hoodie, holding onto his bruised pride and a crumpled receipt. He'd already become a memory, a reminder of what not to accept. He'd had something real and complained it was too difficult. Treated something valuable like trash because he couldn't tell the difference. She squeezed Seol's hand back. "I think," she said, smiling in a way that matched the necklace around her neck, "I'm very available." The whole night had taught her something she'd always known but forgotten. Your worth doesn't change just because someone can't see it. A diamond in the dirt is still a diamond. It doesn't become a rock just because someone's too clueless to pick it up. She'd always been this person, smart, capable, deserving of respect. She didn't need to change. She just needed to be around people who actually recognized what she brought to the table. They raised their glasses. The city lights spread out below them, endless and bright. Lyando's life hadn't just gotten better. It had completely transformed. Never settle for less than you are worth. Like this video if you agree, and see you in the next story.